Hello, everyone. Welcome back to part 2 of Agree or Disagree, the podcast hockey edition. Talking today about the Vancouver Canucks Development Camp was this week. All the prospects of Vancouver were out and about here at the UBC. They climbed the Grouse Mountain as sort of an end thing. Cory, did you do the Grouse Grind?
I don't think I'd be able to make it out of the parking lot if I tried to do the Grouse Grind. No, I stuck to just the on ice sessions, watching that. But no, I didn't get anywhere close to the Grouse Grind.
What were some of your takeaways from development camp?
Well, full disclosure, as a guy who covers the Comets, my eyes were mostly trained on the guys who are likely going to end up in Utica. So I was kind of keeping an eye on players like Brogan Rafferty and Josh Tevis, Mitch Elliott, Michael DiPietro, and Jake Kiley. There were definitely moments where I saw players like Nils Hoglander, whip out the moves and really stand out. But mostly I was keeping my eyes peeled on the Comets' potential players. One guy that did kind of stand out for me, though, that was there on an invite that I just kind of caught myself noticing a few times was Adrian Elefalk. He seemed like a really shifty, kind of greasy player, like a hard guy to kind of, tag along the boards. He had a really nice release on his shot and just looked like a guy that he's somebody that I'm going to be keeping tabs on this year. He's committed to Västerviks over in Sweden. And a little bit of homework on him, and he's actually the son, or his father is the Sedin's player agent, so that among other players in the league. But so that's kind of a neat little tie-in there with him and the Canucks.
Wow, cool. So from a Utica Comet perspective, what were you hoping to see, and what did you end up seeing?
Well, the Comets last year had, outside of Olli Levy and Evan McEnany, they didn't really have much in the way of offensive contributions from the blue line. So I was really kind of, keeping my eyes focused on Rafferty, Tevis, and Elliott, just to kind of see, where those guys were at, where I could picture them in the lineup and that sort of a thing. And so I was keeping my eyes on their release, on their shots, how their skating was. Tevis walks that blue line really well, so I think that's something that, maybe he sees some power play time this year in Utica, which is an area where they could use some help for sure. All three of those guys skate quite well. Mitch Elliott's got a pretty heavy shot too. I don't know that we're going to see a ton of him on the power play to start with Utica, but he's a guy that will probably end up getting a few looks there. Rafferty, Brogan Rafferty, he's a really bright kid. I had the opportunity actually to speak with all three of these guys, and all three sound like they're saying all the right things. They're trying to improve over the summer so they can come into camp ready to compete for a spot with the big club. And obviously, if they don't make it, they're going to be heading down to Utica and making their way as a pro down there.
Do you think they actually go with all those young players on the blue line? Because they did have struggles getting all the young wingers in last year, and just wondering if that's. Do you have any feel on if they are going to go young on the blue line?
Well, last year they had. I've spoken about this a few times, but they had 6 rookie wingers for 8 open wing spots, which certainly wasn't ideal for getting those kids in, especially when you've got, players who were on 2-way deals with the Canucks that still needed to get ice time, and Darren Archibald and Reed Boucher and Brendan Gaunce, Zach McEwen, Michael Carcone until he got traded. So those were all legitimate, players in Utica last year, those ones that I just mentioned, that those kids had to try to, take ice time from. I don't think that's going to really be the case on the back end this year. I firmly believe Olli Juolevi will start in Utica this year. After my conversations with Ryan Johnson and Trent Cull, I think the idea is they need to get him back into playing shape with his knee. He's recovering well so far, but that's an injury that takes some time to get back to full health. It's a pretty similar injury to what Evan McEnany had the previous season, and it took him about half a season last year to get back into shape. So you'll have Olli Juolevi there. Jalen Chatfield will be there. That'll be his third season, but he missed a big chunk of last year with a broken foot. So I look to see some improvement from Jalen this year. Guillaume Brisebois is very likely going to be back there for his third season with the team, and he's we all know the story about Guillaume. He was a third round draft pick that the team has spoken highly of in the past, and for some reason that gets the ire up of people in this market. I think he's a good bet to be a third pairing guy or a seventh, eighth guy in Vancouver down the road. But outside of those guys, these young guys will have a fairly clear path to get minutes. Jamie Cyphers isn't with the team anymore. He retired, and he was their grizzled vet on the blue line last year. They've brought back Dylan Blugis, who's a righty on an AHL deal for the upcoming season, as well as Stephen LeBlanc, who's a lefty. So, the left side will likely consist of Olli Juolevi, Guillaume Brisebois, Josh Teves, and Stephen LeBlanc, and it's possible Ashton Sotner ends up down there too if the team brings in somebody to fill that role that he was playing at the end of the year, and if he clears waivers on the way down. And the right side looks like it'll be Chatfield, Rafferty, Blugis, and Elliott. So I think these young guys are all going to get a pretty decent opportunity. Trent Cull didn't seem to be afraid to put Guillaume Brisebois, Olli Juolevi, and Jalen Chatfield into big minutes and prime situations in their first seasons as pros. So I really do think those kids are all going to get pretty good opportunity this year.
Cory, it might be a hard question to answer, but just being in the rink and watching a prospect development camp and actually with your own eyes being there, what sort of vibe did you get there? Is it how does this potential team this year feel compared to what you saw with the Comets last year?
Well, I think again most of the prospects who were at this development camp won't be playing for the Comets this year. It's mostly going to be those three defensemen and the two goaltenders that I mentioned earlier who I can see there. And that's interesting to me because I spoke a little bit about this with both of Cull and Johnson, but all of these three defensemen can skate and skate well. The Comets back end, I think, is going to be pretty mobile this year, which that'll help them break pucks out of their own end. Which I think that was a big issue for me last year with the team. Trent Cull mentioned it in the interview that I had with him. He started the year with a pretty decent group of six defensemen, but it didn't take long before he was looking around the room and saying, these aren't the six guys I started the year with. There were a lot of players there last year on called up from the ECHL, guys on PTOs as well on the back end. Not as many as the year before, but they still use their share. So, these guys are going to get opportunity, and I think, the speed on the blue line from these guys, I think, is going to be pretty important. That's an element that the team needs, and these three should be able to add that. And as far as the goaltenders go, that's a really, really interesting situation for me because last year Richard Bachman didn't finish the season. He went down with an Achilles injury, and he's in his mid-30s. Not a super easy injury for somebody to come back from. So I'm not 100% sure where he's at in his recovery from that injury. It's possible that he may not be able to play this year, although I think he'll at least be able to give it a shot. But I wonder if the Canucks are going to be happy with, if Markstrom or Demko go down with an injury, who are they calling up? Are they going to, bring up Mike DiPietro. We saw what happened in his debut last year. I mean, he'll get more games in this season, obviously, at the pro level, at a lower league, but I'm still not sure that they'd want to have to lean on him if they had to. Same with Jake Kiley, because he's yet to play an NHL game, and Bachman had a tough go in his time with the Canucks last year. So I do wonder if we'll see them add another goaltender to the mix, like a legitimate, solid number 3 who can split time with one of the kids in Utica while the other one heads down to Kalamazoo. I did broach the subject with Jim Benning, with Trent Cull, and with Ryan Johnson if they were, prepared to go into the season with 3 goaltenders on the roster in Utica, and all 3 said that, that situation hasn't been all completely sorted out yet, and there's plenty of time for that to work itself out, and all 3 said that the young guys do need to play, so I wouldn't be surprised if one of Kiley or DiPietro ends up in Kalamazoo, while the other one stays in Utica with a veteran to platoon with. And I know it'll probably ruffle a few feathers, but it wouldn't surprise me if Mike DiPietro is the guy that spends a bit of time in Utica or in Kalamazoo to start the year. I think they can get him a fair bit of ice time that way, rather than sitting on the bench and watching one of the other guys play. It's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out.
So I guess one of the big talking points with Utica last year was the relationship between the players and management, with Trent Cull and Ryan Johnson specifically. In your mind, what do you see that there's going to be any changes in that relationship? What adjustments do you see happening there?
Well, the funny thing about that is, as somebody that watches the games, and I know I say that sometimes, and people don't like me using that as that gives me a bit of validity, but it is. I mean, when you watch the games, you can kind of see what's going on with the player deployment. I talked about this with Trent Cull when I spoke with him at development camp. I told him there was a perception in Vancouver that he plays to win coaches to win rather than coaching to develop players. I asked him about the perceived communication issues with Jonathan Dahlen and Petrus Palmu, and the answers he gave me were more or less what I expected to hear from him. I mean, you've got young players like Zach McEwen and Guillaume Brisebois and Ashton Sautner who have had success under this coaching staff, who've made their NHL debuts under this coaching staff. And the common theme with all 3 of those players is that they're hardworking guys and they absorb coaching and they put in the work. And when they get an opportunity, they're able to take advantage of that opportunity. Now, on the flip side of that, we had Petrus Palmu and Jonathan Dahlen on their way out of town, throwing a bit of shade at the coaching staff and saying that they felt they didn't understand their role and they didn't understand that there was a lack of communication. And in speaking with Cull, he seemed a bit. He didn't really understand how they felt there wasn't proper communication. He made it pretty clear to me that they spent quite a bit of time with all the young players. The young guys get the lion's share of their attention down there, but he also mentioned that they still have that other layer of prospects that need to continue developing, the Zach McEwens, the Ashton Sautners, the Guillaume Brisebois. Those guys, they need to continue to get put into positions that help their careers move on as well. And after talking with Cull, I did get the impression that we're going to see, Cole Lind and Jonah Gadjevich get more opportunity this year. I saw it with my eyes last year at the end of the year. Both players were getting more minutes. They saw ice time with, a little more favorable line mates, if you want to look at it that way, as far as the guys that might help them, provide a few more points. I do think that it's a little bit overblown in our market as far as how the players are deployed. I do see. I don't necessarily agree with everything that the coaching staff has done or does, but I do see the method to the madness there. I do understand where they're coming from. When you watch guys like Lind and Gadjevich at the start of the year, they simply weren't ready for more minutes. A guy like Lucas Yashik was, and he got them. He spent like the first 2 months basically on the first line, or bouncing back and forth between the first and second line. And the issue there for him was he was hot and cold in that role. He did really well for a few games, and then he'd slow down for a few games as far as his production, and that was something else that Trent Cull mentioned. Sometimes the young guys, they get put in a position and they show well for a handful of games, but they can't keep that pace up, and that's just part of the process. They're learning the game, and they're learning what they can get away with and what they can't, and it's, as I said, it's a process, and I think these guys are doing a pretty decent job considering what they've had at their disposal down there.
In regards to Lind and Gadjevich, do you have a sense one or the other has the inside track on those extra opportunities this season, or is it still kind of a dead heat for them?
Well, I think Cole Lind is probably the one out of the two who's got the higher upside. Jonah's a smart player. He's I've said it before, he knows where to be on the ice, but his skating to this point has held him back a little bit, and as compared to Cole Lind. I kind of see Jonah ending up, if he makes the NHL, I see him as more of a fourth line, third line role player, energy guy who can mix it up when he has to, provide some secondary offense, and hopefully we'll see him getting some maybe some penalty kill minutes this year if his skating is up to the task, so that we can they can help out his defensive awareness a little more. I think he's got a chance at being a player down the road, but I think Cole's ceiling is a little higher. I think he's a guy that can play further up your lineup once he's up to speed. I think Cole's a guy who can maybe provide a little bit more offense. Maybe not as much of a physical game as Jonah provides. I just see them as different players, with Cole having the higher ceiling at this time.
One of the big holes right now on going into next year for Utica is up the middle and at center. And I was hearing some rumors that the Canucks may be looking at sending Adam Gaudette back down there come the fall, based off of if he doesn't blow people away at camp. But did you hear anything around that when at development camp with Cull or Johnson?
Not with Cull or Johnson, but I did. I spent a fair bit of time over the last week here speaking with some of the other guys in the media, some of the other media members, and that was a fairly a common thought process, that with Pettersson, Horvat, Sutter, and Beagle down the middle, that it's possible that Gaudette, not needing waivers, he might end up starting in Utica this year. I thought that maybe they'd send Ryan Spooner down there as well through waivers, but they're buying him out, so that's not going to happen. Right now, they've got Wasey Hamilton signed to an AHL deal for this upcoming season. He can play the middle. He also plays the wing, but he's clearly suited for a fourth line role over being higher up the lineup, playing with the offensively minded kids. They've got Carter Banks, who can play the middle, but Trent Cull seems to prefer him on the wing. Seamus Malone is another guy who's there on an AHL deal. He came in late last year, played, I believe it was 6 games, put up 3 goals, plus a shootout goal. Now, he can play the middle, but Cull used him on the wing. He's a bit of a smaller player, so maybe that's the thought process there. Lucas Yashik, they tried him a little bit in the middle last year for a handful of games, but they see him more as a winger. And we know Zach McEwen has played his whole career in the middle before joining the Canucks organization. But again, they see him as a winger, and that seems to be working out pretty well for the player and the team so far. So I do agree they need some help down the middle. I broached that subject with all 3 of Ryan Johnson, Trent Cull, and Jim Benning. I got a bit of a chuckle out of Jim Benning when I brought that up because it's early in the off season and there's a fair bit of time left for them to get to work, and he's more focused on the big club. But he did say that they're planning on speaking to a couple of centers in the upcoming week during free agency who they could possibly sign as depth guys who can, come up and down, because right now they don't have a center that they can call up. So last year they at least had Tanner Caro, who did fantastic work for the Comets, but didn't get a sniff with the big club.
Back to Juolevi for a second. In your mind, and the plan, at least, of course, is for what you're saying, is to start the year in Utica. Is the hope here that he spends the whole year? What would you hope, I guess, or what would be a good expectation? That, like, one full year in Utica, or half a season in Utica, or what do you think is going to happen there?
Well, what I think should happen might not be what does happen. Personally, I want him to start in Utica because I feel like I think it's going to be asking too much of him to step right into the NHL this season, even as just a third pairing guy or as the extra guy. After coming off of this knee injury, I think he's going to need some time to get back into shape. Trent Cole seemed to think he'll probably need, maybe a couple of months for sure to get his knee back into shape. I think he's kind of basing that off of how things went with Evan McEnany last year. I do think that he will see NHL time this year if he's healthy. I think that he's a guy that they definitely they've got high hopes that he's going to be able to be a player for them, like a legitimate player for them down the road. I've always kind of seen him as a second pairing guy, sort of in a Dan Hamhuis mold, maybe not quite as physical, but a guy who can play a steady game and make a good pass, and he's not going to be a sexy player like a Quinn Hughes who's going to be making you jump out of your seat all the time. But I think he's a guy that can definitely hold down a good role for this club going forward. I do want to see him get a fair bit of time with the Comets this year, like ice time. His ice time wasn't really super sheltered last year. He played on the first pairing for the most part with Jalen Chatfield over his 18 games. He got a ton of time on the power play, which he did fairly well on. Didn't see a ton of time on the penalty kill. That's something that I think we'll see a difference this year. I think they're going to want him getting a fair bit of minutes on the PK so that he can bring that when he gets to the NHL level. I do like his game. I think he needs to be able to close his gaps a little quicker, and his reads need to become a little bit quicker to him. But it was a really small sample size. He only got 18 games in at the AHL level. So I think we're probably going to see him for at least a half a season in Utica still this year.
Sean, you have a question?
I think we've covered basically the three major things in terms of Canucks Comets is the center with Gaudette and if McEwen doesn't make the club out of camp, I wouldn't be surprised that they give him a shot at center again. Just because, like you said, he played center going forwards, and maybe that just gives them something, and him an extra tool going forwards.
Yeah, I've always kind of that's in my first season of covering the team, that was a drum I was beating all season long. He's a big body, he's got experience there. He does take his fair share of face-offs for the Comets. He has ever since he joined the team. He just does it as a winger. In speaking with Zach, I mean, he's happy to go back to playing the middle from my conversations with him, but he's also happy to stay where he is on the wing. His words to me were, the team has a plan for me, and I want to follow that plan, and that plan seems to be keeping him on the wing. I think he's a guy that they maybe see as like a utility player in that regard, in that we want to keep him on the wing, but we know that, as a winger, he can go in and take face-offs when our centerman gets thrown out. In a pinch, we can use him in the middle. But I really do see him as now as more of a winger than as a center. I think that's just the game that they see him playing where he's going to have the most success for them. And that's a thing, right? Like, I can say, Zach McEwen's 6'4", he's 215 pounds, he's played the middle his whole career. Put him in the middle. You need centermen, but these coaches and management and the player development crew, they'll see things in these players that I obviously don't, because they've been doing this for a long time. They know this game. They know this kind of stuff a whole lot better than I do. And if the team looks at Zach McEwen and sees him as a winger, and looking at the success that he's had so far as a winger for them, I think I'm happy to see him continue on the wall there playing the wing.
Yeah. I the guy does have, like, to me, if he's comfortable as a winger, I would agree with that for sure. And it's nice to have that versatility for sure. Cory, one of the other things I wanted to ask, and I don't remember if I asked this last time, but there is a perception in this market about where Utica is in terms of location. And, of course, this week we also saw Seattle with their AAHL team being in Palm Springs. From your perspective, what are I think that there's this... I'm going to just use the word negative perception about the idea of having a farm club kind of far enough away from Vancouver. And there's part of the fan base would love to see something closer, like in Abbotsford or even closer than that. What about Utica works for the Vancouver Canucks? And for those who don't watch, and you watch, and I think is, from my perspective, you watch. You're more qualified than those that don't. So there you go. Stamp that in. What is the advantage of having the farm club at Utica?
Well, I think there's definitely advantages and disadvantages to both scenarios. I mean, first off, the fan base in Utica is as rabid a fan base as you're going to find in the AHL. There are literally fan groups. They'll load up like 70 fans into a couple of buses and drive through blizzards to get to the Comets game on the road so they can cheer their team on. I'm not sure that we'd be seeing, if the team was in Abbotsford, I'm not sure we'd see busloads of Abbotsford fans driving down to California to watch a road game. This is something that doesn't just happen like once or twice a year with the Comets. This happens on the regular. I'm on a couple of Comets fan pages, and I see these call outs multiple times a year where they'll put together 2 or 3 games. If the Comets are doing a couple of games in a row, they'll take bus loads and they'll follow the team. And I mean, that sort of support from the fan base is pretty great for a young player learning the pro game. Another benefit to being in Utica, it's a bus ride for them pretty much every game that they go to on the road, and it's a bus ride home that night. So these guys they're spending much more time in their own beds. They're not spending time on the road in hotels. Which is going to allow them, in theory, to be taking care of themselves better. They can manage their time better that way. They can eat better food that way. They can be closer to their facility that way to do any off-ice work that they're going to do as well. So that end of things, it makes a lot of sense to keep them where they are. All that said, if the team was in California, they're going to play fewer games. They get 68 games, I believe, in the West as opposed to 76 in the East. But they're flying around. They're on the road a fair bit. It's more wear and tear on their body that way as well. And I mean, if the team was in, say, Abbotsford or in Vancouver, the advantage of being in the West is kind of gone for them outside of just being a car ride away from Vancouver. But we have to realize, as far as call-ups go, which that's the biggest fly in the ointment, I think, for having the team in Utica is, when a player needs to be called up, it's a long way to go, and there's not necessarily connecting flights all the time. But that said, the Canucks, they play 41 of their games on the road, and the Comets play a bunch of their games on the road. So when we look at it that way, the whole advantage of being closer for call-ups is kind of not negligible, but it's not quite as prominent as we can sometimes think it is. I really don't have a problem.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in on that there and say I've always believed that that's been a bit of an overblown thing with the team in Utica as well, especially since, if you lose somebody to injury while on a road trip, there isn't as much time to get somebody in there, but often they're in central or eastern time zone locations anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So on that end of things, like I say, that is a positive, being able to call players up closer if the team's closer, but it's not as big of an issue as we sometimes think it is. I mean, I do have a good rapport with some of the folks in the media in Utica. So on that end of things, if the team moved, I'd be a little bit upset about it that way, a little bit disappointed, because I've built some relationships there in Utica, and I've got some readers there, and I get a lot of good interaction there. But this isn't about me; it's about the team. But honestly, I can see benefits and negatives from both sides of things. I kind of had a little bit of a thought that with the Canucks talking about building a new practice facility, close to GM Place there, or Rogers Arena there, that maybe they build it big enough to house their AHL team and, have it kind of all under the same roof, so to speak. But I'm just not sure that that's something that's, in cards in the near future. The deal that they signed with the Comets was a 6-year deal that starts this year. The Canucks can opt out after the second year and after the fourth year, and obviously it's over after the sixth year, or it's up for negotiation again. So they've given themselves some options. If another situation comes available, they'll be able to at least look at it and say, well, in 2 years from now we can make that move. So like I say, I'm happy to have the team right where it is. I like the Utica area for the teams, for the players. They do get a lot of benefit from being in that spot.
And the challenge, and for those who are like, wow, look what Seattle did, that's really smart. There is some smartness in that. But when Seattle's on a long 6-game road trip in Palm Springs, they're going to have to fly across the country from Palm Springs to wherever as well. So I agree with you guys in terms of, I think it's been a bit overblown, but I was curious about that because there's a lot in the market that do think a lot about that, wanting to have that closer relationship. But
I mean, I do understand that as somebody who covers the team. I mean, I have to take a ferry just to get to Vancouver. So, I mean, if the team moved to Abbotsford, I'd probably see about as many games as I do now. I just wouldn't be able to afford to be going back and forth all the time.
Right.
But as for people who are in this market and who would love to keep closer tabs on the prospects and on the farm team, I 100% understand, the want to have the team closer. I mean, I'd love to be able to, hop on the ferry, drive into Abbotsford or drive to downtown Vancouver or whatever, and, watch the team play, 3 or 4 times a month. That'd be fantastic. But, again, it's not about me. It's about the team. And I just think that, having the team where it is and having the players able to spend way more time, at home and a lot less time traveling on the road. I see a benefit to that in their early years of development. It just gives them more time to spend with the coaching staff. Right.
Yeah, I think the only real disadvantage is that it's a lot easier to have a more hands-on approach with your AHL team if it's closer. I think that's just one thing that I think a lot of fans have been wondering about is how hands-on have the Canucks been, and Jim Benning and Ryan Johnson specifically with Utica versus being a little more with it being so isolated out there as opposed to being closer to Vancouver and the home base there. So I think that's the only major disadvantage I see.
One thing I can speak on that end of it is at the end of the year, end of this season, I was able to go in and interview Ashton Sautner, and I asked him about what sort of resources are available to the players when they're in Utica as opposed to in Vancouver, because he had been, I think, had 17 games up in Vancouver at that point for this season. So he had a pretty good idea of, the day-to-day differences between Utica and Vancouver. And he said, he told me straight up, if I want something, or if anybody and any other player wants something in Utica, all we have to do is ask for it and we get it. The Canucks are fantastic to their prospects down there in that regard. I know there was a lot made about the fact that Jim Benning hadn't been to Utica for a few years or whatever it was. But Jim Benning doesn't have to be in Utica to understand what's going on in Utica. They do send their skills coach down there multiple times a year. Sautner told me that Glenn Carnegie came down there quite a few times last year, worked, with the defensemen, doing skills stuff, worked one-on-one with players with skills stuff. And if a player's got an issue that they want sorted out, they just have to ask, and the team helps them with it. That end of thing is a little bit overblown as well. I mean, I do understand the team needs to be hands-on. They have to know what's going on in Utica, but, the Vancouver Canucks employ Ryan Johnson. They employ Trent Cull. They employ everybody on that staff. So, they're in communication. They're talking all year long. It's not like Utica's on the other side of the planet and Jim Benning has to, fax information back and forth like the old days. Like, it's pretty easy for them to get any kind of info that they need to get on their guys down there.
Yeah. Is there any? Was there anything that there was a lot of conversation, lots of things got reported and noticed. Is there anything that you thought was kind of under-reported or under-notified in the media that you thought at the development camp we should be talking about a little bit more?
I don't know that it was underreported at all, because I think that Patrick Johnson definitely hit on it, but not Dan Kluche. Scott Walker is no longer with the development staff for the Canucks, so that was a bit of a change. He's moved on to Phoenix. We saw Chris Higgins and Dane Jackson there helping out with the on-ice work this year. Both of those guys are, there's no plans at the moment, from what I understand, to bring either guy on board full-time. They're both enjoying what they're doing at the moment, but so there's that end of thing. I think that, that maybe the Canucks might want to look at adding some more resources to their development staff. Other teams will have players. Patrick Johnson was talking about this with me during the week. There are a lot of teams around the league that have, multiple, former players who will are employed by the team and not just going to the AHL club, but they'll go to the players that have been drafted who are in college or who are in junior, and they'll spend time with those guys, going over development stuff, going over health and nutrition, like just keeping them in the loop and keeping tabs on them, face to face, multiple times a year. And I think that's maybe an area that the Canucks could probably benefit from as well, and hopefully we see something like that going forward.
Sean, Dolly, do you have any other questions that you wanted to bring up, or?
Maybe just some quick thoughts, Cory, on the draft. You were at the draft, were you not?
I was there for the first day. I wasn't there for the second day, but that was a good time. I was a little surprised when they took Podkolzin, but I was pretty happy as well. I just that one kind of came out of left field for me.
And they did for me too there, Cory.
Yeah. You should have seen his face.
I kind of thought they might go in a different direction, but the fact that they they took a player who's there are some question marks about when he's going to be available, and there's always the KHL factor with the Russian players. So those are kind of things that maybe could have steered them away, but they overlooked that and took a player that they felt had a high ceiling and a player that fits what they're doing going forward. And I like that. I like that pick. I'm really happy with the Nils Hoglander pick. And I'm going to screw up the rest of these names, but the fella they got in the fourth round there, he looks like he could be a bit of a sleeper pick. Not a sleeper so much, but maybe a bit of a steal as well. He looked. I can't remember his last name right now. I don't have it in front of me, but he looked pretty good at camp. Took a puck to the face on the first day. Went and got a couple of steri strips whipped on there, and he was right back out there. So that was good to see. And the goaltender there, Silovs, I liked what I saw from him, and he's pretty raw, but he's a big guy. He's got some quick legs, long legs that he was stretching out really well to make some saves in some of the drills they were doing. I'm pretty happy with what I see. It wasn't too long ago, like even just last season, you'd go to a development camp and there'd be one or two goalies that were Canucks property, and this year all four belong to Vancouver, and they've still got obviously Bachman and Markstrom and Demko as well. So goaltending depth, I don't want to say it's a huge area of strength, but it's an area where they've got some pretty good potential coming. So I liked that pick as well.
Are you referring to Carson Focht?
No, but I did like what I saw from him as well. I'll have to whip out my notebook here and see if I can find.
Ethan Keppen. Ethan Keppen.
I'm completely blanking on a name here.
Was it Ethan Keppen?
Keppen, that's the guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. He had some nice wheels, and he looked like a guy who I'm going to be enjoying watching if and when he gets to Utica in the coming seasons. He's got some decent enough size to him. His hands looked good, and that's the thing. I mean, it's really hard to pick out too much from these development camps because we didn't really see scrimmages or game action. It was all really skills drills and that sort of thing. So all of these guys, they're carving up the ice pretty well. They can skate pretty well. That's definitely an area that the Canucks focused on, was bringing in players who can skate. And all of these guys were ripping shots. They've all got a pretty good release. So it's really hard to have anybody who really jumps out in this sort of a thing. It'll be interesting to see what happens, when we get to rookie camp and preseason and see how some of these guys fare. We won't get to see all of them, but we'll get to see a couple of these guys get some games, I'm sure.
Well, Sean, did you have anything? Or
no, we've covered a lot today.
Good. Cory, tell us what's your plan for the summer? What are you going to be doing? Is it kind of like everyone else? You're kind of going to be laying low, or do you have plans, or what are your thoughts? What's going on?
Well, as far as content goes, I've got. I interviewed Brogan Rafferty, Josh Tevis, and Mitch Elliott. So I've got that. I'm going to base an article around those three interviews. That should be coming out either later today or tomorrow. I spoke with Mike DiPietro and Jake Kiley, and I'll wrap that into one article as well. I'll speak a little bit on my conversation with Jim Benning in another article. Unfortunately, I had about 24 minutes of Ryan Johnson conversation that I can't seem to pull off of my phone. The file won't play, so that one, if I can get it to work, we'll have some great stuff from Ryan Johnson. But if I can't, I won't be able to use the information because I won't remember it accurately. there'll be Comets content throughout the summer. Anytime there's a an AHL signing, I'll be writing about that. Any moves that come up top that affect the team, I'll be writing about those. And I've got some, a look ahead to what the team could look like. A look back to what they started with last year. Lots of Comets stuff coming this summer.
Awesome. All right, and where do we follow you?
At Cory Hergott, CoryHergott, Comets Cory.
All right, awesome.
On Twitter.
Well, Cory, we really appreciate you taking the time on the long weekend to come chat with us. So we thank you very much for that and all the great work you do. And congratulations on your first interview with Jim Benning. Congratulations on that as well.
Much appreciated. I wasn't expecting that one. When you get to the rink, they give you the media liaison will come up and ask you who you'd like to speak to. And at that day, I had the two goaltenders. That I was going to talk to, and then Jim Benning showed up, and Brendan Batchelor came running past me and waved his arm and said, "Jim's going to speak downstairs. Let's go." And so I just followed the rest of the media guys. I went down there, and I was able to be in that scrum. So that was pretty special. That Brendan Batchelor waved me in to include me in that one, and I got a couple of chuckles out of Jim Benning with my questions about the Comets so early in the off season. But I pulled him aside after the scrum and introduced myself and let him know that I cover the Comets, and he was great. Gave me a few more things off the record that I can't talk about, but that are that I'm pretty happy about, and it won't be the same next time I talk to him. He'll know who I am this time around. So that's also pretty good as well for me.
Cool. That's great. Really building some trust there right away with the general manager. That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's been this whole thing working with Canucks Army and being able to have these experiences that I've had over the last couple of seasons has been a pretty special thing for me. I can't say enough how much I appreciate it, and I'll just say this to anybody that's listening: if you've got something that you're passionate about, something that like a job that that's your dream, just go for it. I mean, 2 years ago, I never thought I'd be standing in a media scrum with J-Pat and Brendan Batchelor and Farhan Lalji with my phone in Jim Benning's face and asking questions. What I thought were important questions about the Utica Comets. So, if there's something that you're really passionate about, just do it.
Awesome. Well, we will leave it there. Thanks again, Cory. Thanks everyone for listening. Oh, Sean, Tyler, just remind us where we can follow you.
I am BeardyConnect03 on Twitter.
And I'm on Twitter at TNoble, TNOBLE.
All right. And I am KVOLE. Cory, we will talk to you everyone very soon. Bye for now.